Section 1 of The Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri, translated by Philip H. Wicksteed. Treatise 1, Chapters 1 to 4. Chapter 1. As saith the philosopher in the beginning of the first philosophy, all men by nature desire to know. The reason whereof may be that each thing, impelled by its own natural foresight, inclines to its own perfection. Wherefore, inasmuch as knowledge is the distinguishing perfection of our soul, wherein consists our distinguishing blessedness, all of us are naturally subject to the longing for it. Yet of this most noble perfection many are bereft, for divers causes, which, inside of the man and outside of him, keep him from acquiring the habit of knowledge. Inside of the man there may be two defects and impediments, the one from the side of the body, the other from the side of the soul. From the side of the body is it when the parts are unduly disposed, so that it can receive naught, as with the deaf and the dumb, and their likes. From the side of the soul is it when vice hath such supremacy in her that she giveth herself to pursuing vicious delights, wherein she is deluded to such a point that for their sake she holds all things cheap. Outside of the man likewise two causes may be detected, one of which brings about compulsion, the other indolence. The former is that family and civic care which rightly engages to itself the greater number of men, so that they may not abide in leisure of speculation. The latter is the defect of the place where the person is born and nurtured, which may chance to be not only void of all provision for study, but remote from studious folk. The two first of these causes, to wit, the first from the inner side and the first from the outer side, are not to be blamed, but to be excused, and deserve to be pardoned. The two others, though one of them more than the other, deserve to be blamed and abominated. Manifestly, then, may he perceive, who rightly considers, that few be left who may reach to that habit which is desired by all, and well nigh beyond number are they which be hindered, and which live all their lives famished for this universal food. O blessed those few who sit at the table where the bread of angels is consumed, and wretched they who share the food of sheep. But inasmuch as every man is naturally friendly to every man, and every friend is grieved by the defect of his friend, they who are fed at so lofty a table are not without compassion towards those whom they see browsing round on grass and acorns in the pasture of brutes. And inasmuch as compassion is the mother of benefaction, they who know ever proffer freely of their good wealth to those poor indeed, and are as a living spring, at whose waters the natural thirst above spoken of is refreshed. And I, therefore, who sit not at the blessed table, but having fled the pasture of the common herd, gather, at the feet of them who sit at meat, of that which falls from them, and who, by reason of the sweetness which I experience in that which little by little I gather, recognize the wretched life of those whom I have left behind me, moved to compassion, though not forgetting myself, have reserved somewhat for the wretched, which somewhat, already some time agone, I have displayed to their eyes, and thereby have made them the more eager. Wherefore, desiring now to make provision for them, I purpose to make a general banquet of that which I have already displayed to them, and of the bread which is needful for such like viand, without which they might not eat it at this banquet. Such bread, to wit, as is worthy of the viand which I well understand to have been offered them in vain. And therefore I would not have any take his seat who is ill disposed as to his organs, inasmuch as he hath neither tooth nor tongue nor palate, nor any addicted to vice, inasmuch as his stomach is full of poisonous and contrary humours, so that it would not retain my viands. But let come whosoever, because of family and civil care, hath been kept in human hunger, and let him seat himself at the same table with others impeded in like manner. And at their feet let all place themselves who have been excluded by their sloth, for they are not worthy to sit more high. And let these and those take my viand, together with the bread which will enable them both to taste and to digest it. The viands of this banquet will be served in 14 fashions, that is to say, 14 odes, treating as well of love as of virtue, which, without the present bread, had the shadow of a certain obscurity, so that to many their beauty was more in favour than their excellence. But this bread, to wit the present exposition, will be the light which shall make apparent every hue of their significance. And if in the present work, which is entitled, and which I wish to be, the Banquet, the handling be more virile than in the New Life, I do not intend thereby to throw a slight in any respect upon the latter, but rather to strengthen that by this, seeing that it conforms to reason that should be fervid and impassioned, this temperate and virile. For a different thing is comely to say and to do at one age than at another. Wherefore certain ways are suitable and laudable at one age, which are foul and blameworthy at another, as will be shown on its own account further on in the 4th treatise of this book. And in that I spoke before entrance on the prime of manhood, and in this when I had already passed the same. And inasmuch as my true purport was other than the aforesaid odes outwardly display, I intend to set them forth by allegorical exposition, after having discussed the literal story, so that the one account and the other will supply a relish to those who are invited to this feast, whom I pray one and all, that if the banquet be not so magnificent as consorts with the proclamation thereof, they shall impute every defect not to my will, but to my power, because what my will herein aims at is a full and hearty liberality. Chapter 2. At the beginning of every well-ordered banquet, the servants are wont to take the bread that is set out, and cleanse it from every blemish. Wherefore I, who in this present writing am taking their place, purpose at the outset to cleanse this exposition, which counts for the bread in my repast, from 2 blemishes. The one is that for any one to speak of himself seems unjustifiable, and the other, that for an expounder himself to discourse too profoundly seems unreasonable. And this appearance of what is unjustifiable and unreasonable the knife of my judgment cleanses away in the fashion that follows. Rhetoricians forbid a man to speak of himself except on needful occasion. And from this a man is prohibited, because it is impossible to speak of any without the speaker either praising or blaming him of whom he speaks. And there is a want of urbanity in either of these kinds of discourse finding a place on a man's own proper lips. And to solve a doubt which rises here, I say that it is worse to blame than to praise, though neither the one nor the other should be done. The reason is that what is directly blameworthy is fouler than what is incidentally so. To dispraise oneself is directly blameworthy, because a man should tell his friend a fault in secret, and there is no closer friend to a man than himself. Wherefore it is in the chamber of his own thoughts that he should take himself to task, and bewail his faults, not openly. Again, for lacking the power or the knowledge to conduct himself rightly, a man for the most part is not blamed, but for lacking the will he always is, for it is by willing and not willing that our badness and goodness is judged. And so he who blames himself, by showing that he knows his fault, exposes his lack of goodness. And therefore a man must refrain, on his own account, from speaking in blame of himself. Self-praise is to be avoided as evil by implication, inasmuch as such praise cannot be given without its turning to yet greater blame. It is praise on the surface of the words, it is blame if we search into their entrails. For words are produced to demonstrate what is not known. Wherefore, whosoever praises himself shows that he does not believe himself to be well thought of, which will not happen unless he has an evil conscience, which in his self-praise is revealed, and when revealed is blamed. And further, self-praise and self-blame are to be shunned for one common reason, bearing of false witness. For there is no man who is a true and just measurer of himself. So does our kindness to ourselves deceive us. Whence it happens that every one hath in his judgment the measures of the unjust trader, who sells with one and buys with another, and each one takes stock of his evil doing with a large measure, and takes stock of his good with a little one, so that the number and quantity and weight of the good seems to him greater than if it were assayed with a just measure, and that of the evil less. Wherefore, when speaking of himself in praise or the contrary, either he speaks falsely with respect to the thing of which he speaks, or he speaks falsely with respect to his own belief, and the one and the other is falsity. And this is why, inasmuch as assenting to an opinion is a way of professing it, he is guilty of discourtesy who praises or blames another to his face, because he who is thus estimated can neither assent nor protest without falling into the error of praising or blaming himself. Save, be it understood, in the way of due rebuke, which cannot be without blame of the fault which is to be corrected, and save in the way of due honouring and magnifying, which cannot come about without mention made of the virtuous deeds or of the dignities virtuously acquired. But returning to the main purport, I say, as indicated above, that speaking of himself is permitted on needful occasions, and amongst other needful occasions two are most manifest. The one is when it is impossible, without speaking of himself, to quash great infamy and peril. And then it is allowed by reason that taking the least evil path of two is in a way taking a good one. And this necessity moved Boethius to speak of himself, so that under cover of consolation he might ward off the perpetual infamy of his exile, showing that it was unjust, since no other arose to ward it off. The other is when by a man discoursing of himself the highest advantage, in the way of instruction, follows therefrom to others. And this reason moved Augustine in the Confessions to speak of himself. For by the progress of his life, which was from bad to good, and from good to better, and from better to best, he gave example and instruction which could not have been received otherwise on such sure testimony. Wherefore, if the one and the other of these occasions excuses me, the bread of my leavening is purged from its first blemishes. I am moved by the fear of infamy, and I am moved by the desire to give instruction which in very truth no other can give. I fear the infamy of having pursued so great a passion as he who reads the above named odes conceives to have had dominion over me, which infamy is entirely quenched by this present discourse concerning myself, which shows that not passion but virtue was the moving cause. I purpose also to reveal the true meaning of the said odes, which none may perceive unless I relate it, because it is hidden under figure of allegory. And this will not only give fair delight to hear, but subtle instruction, both in discoursing after this fashion, and in understanding after this fashion the writings of others. Chapter 3. Worthy of much blame is the thing which, being appointed to remove some special defect, itself induces that same; as if one should be appointed to part a strife, and before he had parted it, set another on foot. And now that my bread has been purged on one side, it behoves me to purge it on the other, that I may escape this latter blame. For my present writing, which may be called a kind of commentary, while commissioned to remove the defect of the aforesaid odes, may perhaps in certain places be a little difficult itself, which difficulty is here designed to avoid a greater defect, and not in ignorance. Oh, that it had pleased the disposer of the universe that the occasion of my excuse had never been, for then neither would others have sinned against me, nor should I have unjustly suffered penalty, the penalty, I mean, of exile and of poverty. Since it was the pleasure of the citizens of the most beauteous and the most famous daughter of Rome, Florence, to cast me forth from her most sweet bosom, wherein I was born and nurtured until the culmination of my life, wherein with their good leave I long with all my heart to repose my wearied mind, and end the time which is granted me, through well nigh all the regions whereto this tongue extends, a wanderer, almost a beggar, have I paced, revealing against my will the wound of fortune, which is often wont to be unjustly imputed to him who is wounded. Verily have I been a ship without sail, and without helm, drifted upon divers ports and straits and shores by the dry wind that grievous poverty exhales. and I have seemed cheap in the eyes of many who perchance had conceived of me in other guise, by some certain fame, in the sight of whom not only has my person been cheapened, but every work of mine, already accomplished, or yet to do, has become of lower price. The reason why this comes to pass, not only in me, but in all, it is my pleasure here briefly to touch upon. And first, why a man's reputation dilates things more than truth demands. And then, why more than truth demands, his presence makes them shrink. Good report, begotten at the beginning in the mind of a friend by a good action, is first brought to birth by this mind. For the mind of an enemy, even though it receive the seed, doth not conceive. This mind which first gives it birth, further to adorn its present, and also for love of the friend who receives it, does not restrain itself within the limits of the truth, but passes beyond them. And when it passes beyond them in order to adorn its utterances, it speaks against conscience. When it is the illusion of love that makes it pass beyond them, it does not speak against it. The second mind, which receives it thus, is not contented to abide by the dilating of the first mind, but sets about to adorn its own report, as being its own proper effect in the matter, and so, both for the sake of so adorning it, and also by means of the illusion which it receives from the love begotten in it, it makes the dilation more ample than it was when it came to it, and this in concord and in discord with conscience, as before. And the like doth the third receiving mind and the fourth, and so to infinity it dilates. And in like manner, reversing the aforesaid causes, we may see the reason why infamy is magnified in like fashion. Wherefore Virgil saith in the fourth of the Aeneid, that fame lives by moving and grows by going. Clearly then may whoso will perceive that the image begotten by fame alone is ever more ample, whatsoever it may be, than the imagined thing in its true state. Chapter 4. The reason having now been shown why fame dilates the good and the evil beyond their true magnitude, it remains in this chapter to show the reasons which reveal to us why a man's presence contracts them in the other direction. And when these have been shown, we shall easily advance to our main purpose, which concerns the above-mentioned excuse. I say then that for 3 causes presence makes a person count for less than his real worth. The first of which is childishness. I do not mean of age, but of mind. The second is envy. And these 2 exist in the judge. The third is the alloy of humanity, and this is in the person judged. The first can be briefly discoursed of thus. The greater part of men live after sense, and not after reason, like children, and such know not things save only on their outer surface, and their excellence, which has reference to their due end, they do not see, because they have the eyes of their reason shut, which penetrate to the perception of that end. Whence they quickly perceive everything that they can perceive at all, and judge according to their vision. And because they form a certain opinion on the strength of a man's fame, by hearsay, wherefrom in the man's presence the imperfect judgment, which judges not after reason but after sense alone, is at variance. They hold all that they have heard before to be a lie, and despise the person whom before they prized. Wherefore with such as these, and almost every one is such, a man's presence makes the one and the other quality shrink. Such as these are quickly set a longing, and are quickly satisfied. They are often rejoiced and often saddened with brief delights and glooms, and they quickly become friends and quickly enemies. They do all things like children, without use of reason. The second may be understood by these considerations. Likeness in the vicious is the cause of envy, and envy is the cause of hostile judgment, because it suffers not reason to plead on behalf of the object of envy. And the power of judgment is then like to the judge who listens only to one side. Wherefore, when such as these see the famous person, they are straightway envious, because they look upon his members and upon his faculties, which are like their own, and they fear, because of the excellence of such a one, to be the less prized. And these not only pass a hostile judgment under the influence of passion, but by defaming cause others also to pass a hostile judgment. Wherefore with them presence makes the good and the ill in every one presented to them shrink. And I say the ill, because many, taking delight in ill deeds, envy ill doers. The third is the alloy of humanity, which has its source in him who is judged, and works not save by some familiarity and intercourse. To make which clear, be it known that man is blemished in many directions, and as Augustine says, no man is without blemish. One while the man is blemished by some passion, which maybe he cannot resist. Another while he is blemished by some distorted member, and another by some stroke of fortune, or he is blemished by the infamy of his parents, or of some one nigh of kin to him. Which things are not borne by fame, but by the man's presence, and by his intercourse he reveals them. And these blemishes throw some shadow over the brightness of his excellence, so as to make it seem less clear and less worthy. And this is why every prophet is less honoured in his own country. This is why a man of excellence should grant his presence to few, and his intimacy to fewer, that his name may have acceptance and not be despised. And this third cause may operate in the case of evil as well as good, if each element in the argument concerning it be turned the opposite way. Wherefore it is clearly seen, because of the alloy from which no man is free, presence contracts the good and the ill in every man further than truth wills. Wherefore, because, as said above, I have exposed myself to nearly all the Italians, and therefore have perchance cheapened myself more than the truth wills, not only to them whom my reputation has reached, but to others also, whereby all that I have done has doubtless been more lightly esteemed, together with myself, it behoves me to give something of weight to the present work by a loftier style, that it may seem a thing of more authority. And let this excuse for the severity of my comment suffice. End of section 1.